Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Election Predictions official YouTube channel, where I talk all things politics and elections. Coming up, we are going to be tier listing the current field of Republican primary candidates based on their chances of winning the nomination in 2024. The list is crowded, and there are plenty of intriguing dynamics at play that we will be sure to go over. But before we get started, if you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel down below and hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The 2024 presidential election cycle is heating up, and I have all kinds of analysis, election nights, and electoral college map predictions coming up that you don't want to miss. Now let's get into today's video. The GOP presidential nomination race is marked by several unprecedented milestones. We have a former president facing criminal charges who aims to reclaim the Oval Office, a vice president who resisted involvement in his former boss's attempts to overturn the election, the most accomplished woman to ever run as a Republican for the highest office, and a once superstar governor stumbling into the spotlight. The ultimate victor of what is sure to be this very tumultuous fight, to say the least, will have the chance to limit Democratic President Joe Biden to a single term. I have gone ahead and categorized the entire field into 5 distinct groups, roughly based on their likelihood of securing the nomination, and I will be going through each candidate as well as providing a comprehensive assessment of their strengths and weaknesses on the path to the 2024 convention in Milwaukee. The 5 groups I have laid out are the favorite, and you can probably guess who will be placed in that category, then contenders, the second tier of favorites, so to speak, who are running credible campaigns with the capacity to be competitive, but lag behind the favorite for obvious reasons. Still, candidates in this tier have enough support in key early states or among a segment of the GOP electorate to build upon as the primaries approach, or potentially play king or queen maker down the road. The long shot tier describes candidates who are not currently a factor in the race, but could potentially make noise somewhere down the road. There is always the possibility of catching fire, especially in one of the early states, to propel you into the next tier. Just ask Pete Buttigieg. But of course, there is a much higher likelihood of an uninspiring and uneventful early dropout. The true bottom tier, which I have labeled here as no chance, includes the plurality of candidates in the race, and will be home to those who would be excited, if not elated, to hit 1% in a non-affiliated poll before inevitably dropping out. For Succession fans out there, think Connor Roy. Finally, this bottom tier will actually include a candidate who's probably a step above the not a chance category and would have had a real chance of winning the Republican nomination if it were in fact 2012. But of course it's not, and the shifting electorate of the Republican Party does not necessarily favor or reflect their rhetoric like it would have 10 years ago. So, to begin, first on this randomized list is South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who is a favorite of the party's donor class and hails from an early primary state. He is currently polling at around 3% according to 538's polling average, which is good enough for 5th place, and he has received the most notable endorsement of any candidate in the field thus far, from Republican Senate Whip John Thune. Scott is often touted as Republicans' most electable candidate for the general election, and is looking to chart a path to the nomination by selling primary voters on a sunnier vision for the country than Trump's retribution tour or DeSantis' war on liberalism. He definitely won't have to worry about money, as he is one of the Senate GOP's strongest fundraisers and has connections to well-heeled conservatives like Oracle's Larry Ellison and the Koch network. All of these factors are more than good enough to vault him firmly into the contender category, although it may not be quite his time this cycle, as it appears that Republican primary voters are more attracted to the more uncompromising rhetoric of the aforementioned frontrunners. And if both Scott and former Governor Nikki Haley are still on the ballot in South Carolina, it could dilute the state's favorite son and daughter candidacies. Next is Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, who entered the race on June 15th, joining an already crowded list of Floridians. Now, as the only major Latino candidate in the race thus far, Suarez can credibly claim appeal with an important and emerging GOP persuasion target, but that's just about the only positive indicator for his 2024 prospects. Suarez says he did not vote for Trump either in 2016 or 2020. And his COVID policies for Miami had him crosswise with DeSantis' vision of Florida as a refuge from masks and other efforts to mitigate the effects of the deadly virus. Agree with him on policy or not, but those facts are not likely to go over well given Trump and DeSantis are the two most popular figures within the party. Suarez firmly goes into the not a chance column, at least for now. Next up, Larry Elder will join him there, the former right-wing media personality who first took the political plunge when he campaigned to replace California Governor Gavin Newsom in a failed recall effort in 2021, is going national. He may be a strong communicator and perhaps a decent debater given his history in media, but Elder has no path to the nomination. The California recall campaign was a massive fail, and many Republicans blamed his candidacy for their disappointing performance. Asa Hutchinson is next. The former Arkansas governor has had a lengthy career in public office and has received quite a bit of attention as an anti-Trump underdog candidate. Hutchinson has criticized the direction of the party in the Trump era, but selling a return to the conservatism of the 1990s and 2000s is not a popular opinion within the party, nor is his argument that Trump should drop out of the race following his indictment in New York. Hutchinson is likely to become a pretty forgettable candidate when all is said and done, though he has polled around 1% pretty consistently since his announcement, which can't be said of most others. He may end up being the best of the bunch, but Hutchinson belongs in the no chance category. Vivek Ramaswamy, the investor and former pharmaceutical company CEO, has launched an intriguing outsider campaign based largely on a critique of wokeness among corporations and other institutions. He has been polling impressively around 2 to 3%, good for 6th place in both 538 and Morning Consult's polling averages. And he is certainly wealthy, but that can be as much of a negative as it is a positive, as self-funding candidates often tire of spending millions to keep their campaign afloat if they're not catching on with the electorate. Ramaswamy has shown an ability to do so, unlike the candidates who will populate the tier below him, and therefore belongs in the long shots category. Don't be surprised if he debates well and makes a run before the first primary. But unless he can pull off a shock victory in an early state, Ramaswamy lacks the name recognition to go very long into the calendar. Alrighty, now for the candidate this tier was specifically made for. Christie can go directly into the if this were 2012 category, where he so deservedly belongs. The former New Jersey governor was one of the first 2016 candidates to endorse Trump after he finished both 10th in Iowa and 6th in New Hampshire and withdrew his own candidacy. Christie is now Trump's most vocal critic in the 2024 field, and thus his only path to the nomination would come if GOP voters suddenly decide to turn their back on the former president and the Trump era. Christie did famously and effectively end Marco Rubio's 2016 campaign on the debate stage, but needless to say, Trump commands a much more loyal base. Ultimately, Christie infamously missed out on his best chance to run in 2012, and no matter how effectively he criticizes Trump on a potential debate stage later this summer, he's not going to be the one to succeed him. Montana's former Secretary of State is running for president. I won't blame you if you didn't know that at all. He was actually the first Republican office holder to throw his hat into the ring back in November of 2022. He also recently released a country album, which you can go check out. It's by Corey Stapleton and the Pretty Pirates.
There's never time in the day to say all the things.
Moving on, former President Donald Trump. He is the frontrunner for the nomination, as he has been ever since he lost the 2020 general election. Trump is seeking to become only the second man in history to serve a non-consecutive term in the White House, and he is certainly in very good position to take another crack at Joe Biden. As of June 20th, he is polling in 52.5% of support in 538's polling average and 57% in Morning Consult's weekly tracker. As I mentioned in my recent DeSantis video, which you can check out by clicking the link in the upper right-hand corner, Ted Kennedy in 1980 is the only presidential candidate not to win the nomination after receiving as much support as Trump has now. Bob Dole in 1996, Al Gore and George W. Bush in 2000, and Hillary Clinton in 2016 all polled around Trump's current numbers a year out from their first primary, and went on to win their party's nomination. And notably, with few exceptions, Trump's opponents have refrained from criticizing him out of fear that they may upset his most ardent supporters, who continue to make up the loudest and most profound chunk of the Republican electorate. It certainly seems that the only thing standing between the former president and a July acceptance speech in Milwaukee are his legal complications, although even in the face of two separate indictments, Trump only seems to be getting stronger, at least in the polls. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum is the most recently announced candidate on this list. A former tech executive, Burgum has a reputation as a conservative technocrat, a profile typically more sought after among governors than presidential candidates. If he can somehow turn the focus to governing, he may get some traction. But without any national profile, Burgum is counting on making an impression in the party's primary debates, which he may find hard to qualify for given the sheer size of the field, and whose requirements pose a challenge for lesser-known candidates. Burgum is currently polling at 0% in Morning Consult's weekly tracker, but his unique status as a self-made billionaire and propensity to pursue productive policy goals makes me lean toward giving him the benefit of the doubt and placing him a tier above the no chance category, at the very back of the long shots category. He could very well still end up here by the time the debates roll around, but I can see, at least at this point, him becoming more of a factor than any of the candidates beneath him. Michigan businessman Perry Johnson failed to get onto the ballot in his last campaign for governor in 2022, despite throwing millions at the race, and I fully expect the same thing to happen here. He is throwing everything at Iowa, even airing a Super Bowl ad hoping to gain an early state boost. He did come third place in the 2023 CPAC straw poll after Trump and DeSantis, but that means virtually nothing. And Johnson, like other self-funding outsiders, will likely stop shoveling millions into his campaign once he sees it isn't going anywhere. Another Michigan man, former Congressman Mike Rogers, not to be confused with current Michigan Congressman Mike Rogers, gave up the gavel of the House Intelligence Committee in 2014 to become a talk radio personality. Rogers now says that he's considering a political comeback and is expected to make his decision by the end of the month. He has been a frequent cable news guest, specifically on CNN, so he does have a slightly higher profile than anyone else who has not been on a ballot in more than a decade, though he has been critical of Trump as a pundit. And in this crowded GOP field, he lacks any defining characteristics that would help him break out of this growing list of insignificance. Now, Nikki Haley may be the most impressive general election prospect for Republicans on paper, combining executive experience, foreign policy chops, a tie to Trump's administration, home field advantage in an early state, and a historic candidacy as the first woman of color to be a major candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. The former South Carolina governor and UN ambassador entered the campaign as a younger and fresher alternative to what was, for many months, looking like a Trump versus DeSantis primary fight. A win in South Carolina's primary, of course, which comes third after Iowa and New Hampshire, would go a long way into vaulting Haley into serious contention. But we do have a long way to go before February 24th, and unless she can credibly establish herself as the only viable alternative to Trump, she may end up settling for a split of the anti-Trump vote with the other candidates in this tier and below. On that note, we have finally reached Ron DeSantis. Earlier this year, the Florida governor was considered a co-frontrunner with Trump, even polling ahead of the former president in several head-to-head polls. No other candidate had as much media, donor, and establishment hype coming into their announcement as DeSantis did, but he's mostly stumbled out of the gates, lost support in polls, and gone viral for his apparent awkwardness on the campaign trail. His efforts to sell Trump light to those who want Trump's full-calorie rhetoric and policies, without the baggage, so to speak, have mostly floundered. And Trump has even attacked DeSantis from the left on issues such as abortion and entitlements, which has to an extent undermined a key DeSantis electability argument. All of that being said, though, he does remain by far the most likely alternative to Trump, polling at around 20% nationally according to both 538 and Morning Consult. He has made it clear that he does not want to be the anti-Trump, but rather push a more effective and electable version of the former president's populist movement. Theoretically, it could be a winning primary coalition to combine Trump's biggest fans with loyal Republicans who are skeptical about a third straight Trump nomination. That, however, requires DeSantis to go at Trump directly without alienating too many of his supporters, which has already proven to be an extremely difficult line to walk for the governor thus far. Still, recent history tells us that DeSantis does have a chance. Both Barack Obama and John McCain began their 2008 primary campaigns in the low 20s, well behind frontrunners Hillary Clinton and Rudy Giuliani, respectively. And both Obama and McCain lost support in the later half of 2007 before going on to win their nominations. Of course, neither Clinton or Giuliani were former presidents, with close to 90% favorabilities in their parties. But DeSantis has shown real strength in polling earlier this year, and it's not unreasonable to pose that he can tap back into that if he plays his cards right. Alrighty, moving on, this here is Ryan Binkley, a Dallas area businessman who, like Perry Johnson, is concentrating his early efforts in Iowa. A first-time candidate with no national profile, Binkley will be placed promptly into the no chance column, and we can all move on with our lives as planned. Former Texas Congressman Will Hurd is our penultimate candidate. He only just announced his campaign on June 22nd. Hurd retired in 2020 and has been critical of Trump in the past. His experience as a CIA officer and tenure as a border district congressman give him unique national security and immigration credibility. But that being said, he boasts a voting record of someone who represented a swing district in Congress and would likely be viewed as too compromising on key conservative issues if he does indeed make it onto the debate stage. Finally, we have Mike Pence. The former vice president lands in the contender section of this tier list almost exclusively because of his former job title. Pence defied Trump when he refused to overturn the 2020 election as he presided over the certification of the Electoral College on January 6th. And their relationship, as well as any chance Pence had at winning over Trump loyalists, has completely soured since. Just like each of the other candidates that populate the contenders section, Pence's only chance at winning the nomination are if he becomes the lone anti-Trump choice in the field. To do that, he will not only need to perform strongly in early states, but also convince his counterparts to drop out and endorse him before Trump gains an insurmountable delegate advantage. That is an extremely unlikely scenario, especially as Pence is certainly the least charismatic of the four, and is probably the least attractive general election candidate, at least from an electability standpoint as well. To be fair to him, he is polling at around 5 to 6% on average, but that may actually be representative of his ceiling in this race rather than his floor. That'll do it though for this 2024 Republican primary tier list. I may do another one of these in a couple months, depending on who else enters the field, and if there are enough developments worth making an entirely new video on. Please do sound off in the comments with your thoughts, opinions, and objections about these picks, and let me know what other 2024 primary-related videos you would like to see in the future. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video down below if you did, and subscribe while you're at it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.